Now, these statistics that Rishi has triumphantly released today reveal that fast-tracking migrants through the asylum-seeking system is obviously going on as we speak. But the upshot of it is that 67% of people who have basically arrived here illegally and then claimed political asylum have been given that. So they've been allowed to stay. Where is the deterrent in that? So you're saying to migrants, when you come across the channel, 67% chance of staying. Nowhere else in the world do you get those kind of odds. Where is the deterrent?
I think you're right to ask that question. I think it's a great pity that I'm in my constituency working today and not allowed to be in Parliament to cross-examine the Home Secretary, because we really needed a statement on something of this importance. It is good news the civil service are now processing more people, as they call it. It's bad news that there are still a lot coming, so that the backlog builds up again. And it's certainly questionable as to why such a high proportion are being granted the status they seek, when there are safe routes and safe ways of applying, which they decided not to use for themselves. And these things the government must answer when we get back to Parliament next week.
Is the problem here, Sir John, that there now exists in the canon of law and case precedent, if you will, such low thresholds to claiming asylum here in the UK that of the 25,000 who have been told they've got to go home, it'll probably be about 25,000 appeals, many of which then end up staying. And that the threshold to come into the country and say that you're not safe where you live, that the medical care is not appropriate, that it's impoverished, that it persecutes homosexuals, that there's civil unrest, that you've got a pretty unpleasant, tyrannical president, which basically covers still a fair chunk of the world, just gives you access to come here. And that it's now got to the point that, you know, we need to somehow raise those thresholds.
Well, I think that's a very good question. And yes, I think we need to discuss that. What I'm interested in, and I think many voters are interested in, is having much better overall controls on the number of people who come to this country legally, whether they come in their main numbers by applying properly and getting legal status granted, or they come in this illegal way and then get it converted into legal status. Because, of course, there are far, far bigger numbers coming legally than there are people being granted it after one of these dangerous small boat journeys, joining in a criminal conspiracy in order to get here. So I think the government needs to do an awful lot more to control total migration. Because as I've been pointing out, and as you're implying in some of the things you're saying, it is very difficult to accept hundreds of thousands of extra people every year because they need homes, they need school places, they need utilities, they need cities around them. And if you're going to invite in 750,000, as we did in the previous year, you need to build 3 Southamptons in that year to make sure they've got proper facilities. And we're simply not able to keep up with that kind of rate of increase.
I think one Southampton is quite enough for all of us, with apologies to people from Southampton, of course. But to politicians, to John, of all creeds, are wont to tell us, oh, you know, the immigration, OK, it's an issue, but the real thing that matters is cost of living, people struggling to get by. I agree with that, but I also think politicians have a tendency to downgrade the importance of the migrant crisis, both legal and illegally, in electoral terms. I think it's going to be a big issue. Would you agree?
Well, I do agree, and I think it is part of the general economic problem that we're talking about. Because if you need to provide all this extra accommodation and all these extra facilities for people, many of them come in and either are not working at the beginning or they take very low-paid jobs in order to get in. And so there is a massive cost on taxpayers. An awful lot of the housing has to be subsidised. An awful lot of the public services need to provide extra surgeries, extra school places, and that is all extra taxation on the rest of us. And so those of us who want a low-tax, more prosperous Britain also want to control legal as well as illegal migration because the public sector costs are just enormous if we carry on at this current very high level.
There's also a conversation building at last that hasn't been touched for a very long time, still very delicate to touch now, which is that when people frame the problem of very high levels of migration as an economic one, that's only one part of the story. There also are cultural issues when you have lots of people coming from all around the world. I think the gross figure is over 1 million. So when you take out those who have gone back, you're talking about a very significant number of people who don't necessarily share our particular cultural mores, or then end up coexisting within society as part of our social fabric.
Well, I mean, you're making your own point. I'm concentrating on the practical issues, because I think if you invite people into your country, they have expectations to live to a similar living standard to those who are already here. And we simply cannot deliver that expectation. And yes, the pace of change can be too great for the settled communities that they wish to join. And so there are tensions and issues which I would rather avoid by having a level of legal migration and controlled illegal migration that is much more easily assimilable.
To go back to deterrence, Sir John, James Cleverly, the Home Secretary today, was talking about the effectiveness of the Rwanda scheme in deterring migrants from coming to Britain. Have I missed something? Because I didn't think the Rwanda scheme had actually started yet. And as a deterrent, frankly, if I may say so, it's a complete non-starter, isn't it?
Well, I think the truthful answer is that there hasn't been proper research on what has led to the 36% decline in illegals. The one fact that I heard the Home Secretary give us is that the weather was no worse or no better on average last year than the year before, and so it didn't seem to be weather for the year as a whole that had led to an easy win. I think there needs to be a proper study of what has deterred people, and more importantly, a study of why so many still think it's a good idea. They may well emerge that what you were saying earlier, that they think it's easy and that the odds are very good that has led to so many. And we need to use that research to succeed in actually throttling back the numbers far more than the government has done today.